Hello artists. Alright, today we're going to do a demo on how to plaster our created molds, our skeletons of our food. We talked about Claus Oldenburg and how he made all kinds of different plastered foods. So you guys built your form, which is three-dimensional shape, with various items, and now it's time to plaster those things, put them together. So you'll notice that on your tables there's a tray of plaster and there's a container of warm water on either side of the plaster. It's important to not get our tray of plaster wet. The warm water will activate the plaster and create it so that we can shape it, and then it will harden. But if this starts to get wet because water is dripping across it, it'll be no good. And I'm not giving you guys more plaster. So the reason there's 2 cups of water is so that neighbors across from one another will use this one, and then neighbors over here on this side of the table will use that one and dip that way. So you reach in, you dip, and you move to the outside, not across the plaster. So I will be using this water cup, and I created a hamburger. So here's my bun, my hamburger, and my other bun. So I'm going to show you how we are going to cover those with our plaster. The first step is to take one plaster strip, dip it in the warm water, and then you want to take your free hand and kind of pinch the plaster and squeeze the water out lightly so that it isn't dripping wet. Then you're going to take it, lay it across your aluminum foil, and you want to smooth it out so that none of these holes are showing. So you just kind of smooth the plaster gauze down and then take another strip. So you just work this way. Again, wipe with that free finger, and then I'll lay it across going in an opposite direction so that I start to get a crisscross pattern, and that way my plaster gauze will connect with one another, and it won't, if I lay them all the same direction, they might fall apart when it dries because they're not connected to one another. So I just kind of work in a diagonal pattern going across because I have a circle shape. If you do the ice cream cone or the pie, you would work the same way, just overlapping those gauze strips to one another. Again, squeeze. Now what's going to happen is a little bit of plaster is going to come off on your hands. We cannot put the plaster down the sink, so we will rinse our fingers in this container of water here when we're done. And then over at the supply area, I have wet rags. You'll wipe your hands on the wet rags. There is a container or a bucket of water. You could dip your hands in the water if you need to also. But use the rags over there on the bench to clean your hands. And then when we're all done, this container of water here, we'll dump it actually outside our classroom door on the blacktop. The plaster will not ruin the blacktop, and it will disappear after a few days, especially, I think it's supposed to rain on Thursday, so that's good news for us because then it'll wash it away. Now, what you want to do is make sure you're covering all the aluminum foil. I still have a little aluminum foil here. If you're doing the pie or another shape where you've used the tag board, the cardstock, the heavier paper to create your shape, or you have newspaper, you want to get a couple layers of plaster on that. So I would do at least 2 layers of plaster, and that way it will create a tougher image. It'll shape rather. And then along the side, I'm just going to lay it right along the edge like that. And again, smooth it out. And see how I'm moving all that wet plaster over onto the other pieces of gauze so that it starts to make just one shape. Instead of having individual sheets of gauze, you can see they're all smoothed out, and the plaster, as it gets activated, it makes a smooth surface. So if you just use a wet finger, you can continue to smooth that plaster. Okay, so the top's done. I'm going to flip it over. I want to cover all the aluminum foil. Even though my hamburger will get glued together eventually. I still want to cover all of that aluminum foil, and then again rub. I can still see some of these holes here, so the water will activate that plaster. You don't need the water dripping. Look at there's not very many drips down here. This is what we don't want in there in our tray. So work away from the tray. I'm working really close to the tray just because of the angle of the camera, but you guys can work a little further away. That is a really important thing, is make sure you don't get your gauze reserve wet. That is a very bad thing. Okay, once it's all covered, make sure it's all smoothed out so that you don't see those holes in the gauze, and that you've got all your aluminum or your paper or whatever covered. And then I would work on my next piece. So we're gonna just work that way. When we're all done, again, clean up. Hands in the cup. I will rinse them and they get pretty clean. Then I'll go to the supply area and I will finish cleaning my hands. Okay, when we're done with these, you're gonna put them on a piece of paper, write your name on that paper, put your plastered pieces on the paper, and then put that over on the drying rack. We'll use the wood drying rack in the back of the classroom. Okay, have fun, artists.